I'm surprised, given the resolutions that we took earlier, that an option 2 has been offered up by staff. And I don't support it, but I just wonder how it's got there.
Sorry. Right. So in terms of options, it's my responsibility to make sure that I present all the options that could potentially be considered by council to meet the requirements of making sure our communities of interest are represented appropriately, and also that we make every endeavour to meet the requirements of the legislation, which one of is that plus or minus 10% representation for
Okay, so you're saying
voters.
You had no choice. You had
No choice.
Well, I wouldn't have been comfortable with not presenting it for you to consider.
fair enough.
So, I re-explain this to me. Item 36, paragraph 36, says, in order to meet legislative requirements of the representation review, the council is required to adopt its initial proposal at this meeting.
Where the hell is that?
Yes?
So wasn't our initial proposal to stand pat? We discussed, for example, Maori seats. We decided not to do that. And I thought we basically said status quo is what we want.
So your initial proposal is defined as what proposal you decide today to notify for public consultation. That's as simple as that. That's all that means.
Oh, I was reading all this history to mean that our initial proposal was what we already decided.
No. So that
Well, what did we decide?
the initial proposal is what you decide today.
What did we decide when we decided not to do Maori seats and et cetera? What were we deciding
You just
then?
your decision was you resolved to not establish the Māori seats.
What is their initial proposal?
Whichever of the two proposals you adopt today.
Option 1 or option 2 in front of us. But does option 1 encompass these, because of population changes, the map that's on page 30? So that's because that's not I'm in the Hastings electorate, and are you proposing expanding that?
There were 2 mesh blocks that Hastings District Council shifted from one ward to another, which, if we try and keep in line with their ward boundaries, means that those 2 mesh blocks
We're the same.
shift from Ngāti into the Hastings constituency.
Well, it's a half map here, you know, it doesn't include Flaxmere. And where does this go? Wanders off to the sea, does it?
It's only showing the part of the boundary that's affected
by the changes.
by the changes.
No, because Hastings didn't include all up here as well,
No, and it still doesn't.
or that
So-
line. Sorry, have I drawn the line wrong?
But what this is a grab of my constituents,
Well, yeah, that's what it appears.
putting them into yours.
Yeah.
Desperate grab.
Some of them
Your
love me, but some of them don't.
Gerrymandering.
It's gerrymandering.
Joe Bajilki Peters
It's,
lives.
it's definitely Joe. It's definitely him. Yeah, that's the
Down the
man.
ex-finest citizen.
So where does it, Clive? Does it take Clive?
No.
No.
Oh,
So you see this
Oh, Whakatū.
boundary here? The change is that this blue bit will now be included in the Hastings. Everything else that's not in the Hastings remains
In Narrora.
in the Ngāti.
Just that your map isn't clear, that's all.
Yeah.
no.
It's a very poor map.
Okay, so Hastings picks up all those extra blue bits. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
These blue bits up here were already within the constituency, the Hastings constituency, so there's no change with those.
Because they're inside the red boundary.
But see, that's why the map is a very poor map. It indicates
Yeah,
something
because,
different than what it actually says.
Mr. Chairman, for expediency, I'm prepared to move 3 through to 7.
Oh, we better find out what you're up to here, Alan.
Which is option 1, which is what we indicated our preference was when we last discussed it.
I'm happy to second that.
So no changes, in other words.
No, it includes those changes
Those small
to
changes.
the mesh blocks.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is we align our votes for the Hastings constituency with that of the Hastings District Council. So the voters who are voting in the Hastings District Council will have the same mesh block. So we'll be voting for Hastings councillors and Hastings regional councillors, and there'll be no difference. So that's what we're recommending. It's short, isn't it?
It is, and the motion that's been moved is also to retain the status quo in terms of 9 elected members.
I agree with that, and I'll second it.
It's already been seconded.
Is it?
Yeah.
I got it wrong. Well, I'll third it.
Do you wish to speak, Alan?
Just briefly to say, look, this representation has served us well for several terms. We're a compact council, and that's all that we need to be. 11 members will probably increase meeting times by 25%. And it's not that it will affect me because I won't be here, but it will also have some effect on reducing a council's remuneration, and I don't think that's warranted either. So the present system is a good system.
Seconded, Debbie, just to speak.
Just quite simply keep it simple. This is what the public knows, and a little bit of aligning there, it just makes sense. So.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I'm in support of the motion, it would be interesting to see, I assume it's every 3 years that we go through this review, or is it every 6 years? 6 years. It'll be interesting to see with the proposed population growth in Napier and Hastings as to where that ends up and how definitive that community of interest kind of thing is, because one of the things I'm conscious with being a Napier ward member is that I don't have a huge of any rural constituency, and a big part of what we do is involved with the land. So it would be, I think, when we come to that review in 6 years' time, to be thinking outside this box a wee bit in terms of that issue.
The one at Hunk of Central Hawke's Bay.
Sorry? You want a hunk of Wairoa. I suggest it stands for Wairoa next time.
I'm thinking a hunk of Tūtera, Chair.
Are there any other speakers? Therefore, we have a motion from Alan, the status quo. All those in favour? Aye. Seconded. Thank you very much. That was expedient, all right.
Thanks, Leo.
We have recommendation from the Environment and Services Committee. Tom?
I might make this slightly longer presentation than normal, since 4 councillors were not present at this meeting. I will not single out any of the delinquencies. But so bear, and if I'm saying too much, just shut me down here. But was there a motion?
Well done. Okay, floor's yours, Tom.
That was an inevitable consequence.
Okay, please be polite.
Probably, I guess, the most significant money decision we made was to endorse the catchment grants policy, the $30 million erosion control scheme. This is, you'll recall, is effectively the rollout of our land management reorganization as a tool in the first instance for dealing with our riparian planting and wetlands and so forth, and that pot of money. And there was quite a substantial presentation made about that, which, given that this is really going to be a pivotal part of our delivery system going forward, I would urge you, if you haven't looked at the agenda item from that meeting, you should take a look at this plan. It lays it out pretty clearly as to what is in mind. The river berm land, the chief thing I think to come out of that was, so this was an inquiry into how we are managing our land around our various waterways. And as I recall there, the 2 chief things that the staff was proposing, one is that there was a staff position which in the recommendations here, number 3, you'll see commits to considering a provision in the next available annual plan for a ranger person. There was quite a bit of discussion of that, but with the staff feeling that, and in fact, at the time recommending that we commit to making such a hire, and this needed to be somebody with some muscle, basically, because the folks that are needing to be dealt with in these circumstances are not the easiest characters to be involved with. So it was more a Wayne type of staff position that was being contemplated there. There was a bit of pushback from some of the folks, and so the language in the recommendation became consider provision on that matter. There was also quite a bit of discussion, given that we are still going to continue to use cattle basically to weed our land along the waterways. So that's sort of the key provision, but a plan was set out based on the inquiry that had been made to inform all this, to take the area from Fern Hill down to Awatoto, I think it was, on both sides of the Narrowruro, and create a zone where we basically tried a variety of other tools, from cropping on it to a variety of things, to see if we couldn't, over time, come up with a better mousetrap, basically, for how we approach that challenge. I think the costing of that to get it off the ground and so forth was estimated to be maybe $1 million, and then some maintenance costs going forward. That wasn't on the table. We weren't being asked to support that money, but what they would like to do is take that plan and it had some charts with it and so forth, and use it as the basis of some further consultation going forward to seek out some other ideas as to how to manage that land. So feel free to chime in if I'm not getting this right. Zero carbon bill, we have, since we made a decision to identify some people, Rex, Rick, Tom, to comment on what the staff had proposed. The staff had proposed basically more or less endorsing the local government New Zealand submission. No one had any particular issue with that. Subsequently, I made some comments on it. I think you guys were out of the country at the time. The clock passed you by, and so we are now committed to a zero carbon future by, I think, 3 years from now.
Well done.
Since it was left in my hands.
I thought you wimped out on that, Tom.
Pandora Pond, I honestly can't recall. The presentation was, I think, to the effect that we still couldn't quite identify what the exact source of fecal contamination was in that episode of a few months back. Is that basically what happened there? Then we lost our quorum. So then we discussed a whole variety of other things here. Trench 2 water, which we've talked about that some more today. Tuki implementation plan. At the time, we were down to, I think, a little less than 200 property owners who had not filed their FEMPs.
We're now down to double figures.
Down to double figures, okay.
Wow.
So that process is moving along. Whitebait species, I think that took about 3 hours of the meeting. But it was very reassuring, wouldn't you say, Peter? Very reassuring presentation that there are a variety of things we're doing with respect to habitat and work and so forth that hopefully could lead to a better outcome in that regard. All of which is being done within existing budgets and what have you. Future Farming Initiative, the the decision there, there was a paper that laid out, here's how we're going to get this thing off the ground. There's going to be a little working party of 7 or 8 folks yet to be identified and shoulder tapped or whatever, and that a little committee of the staff, senior staff people, myself, and Fenton would attend to getting this ball rolling. And we have a meeting scheduled in a few weeks, I think, to start that process. Biosecurity, that was just the operational plans, which, what can I say? It was a Campbell-Leckie presentation. We're slaying the giant, and we're on our way. Enviro schools, it was just a pretty routine update. I think it has developed that Napier City Council has agreed to put $15K a year for the next 3 years as part of their LTP. Hastings Council yanked their money, so Hastings is putting no money into Enviro schools at this point. That's probably the most significant thing there. So that was pretty much it, and it takes you down to these recommendations, I think all of which I've covered off on.
Tom, will you move that?
Any questions?
Well,
I'll move the recommendations.
Do we have
be
any
adopted.
questions?
Any questions? Or a seconder?
Tom moves it. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Neil second. You don't wish to speak, Neil? Do you wish to say anything? Does anyone else wish to speak? All those in favour of receiving this report?
Aye. So
Moved.
next time we have a report, can we have it all in the body of the report? I want the King James version of it. Now on to
It was very well done, Tom. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
excellent, Tom.
Item 9, Kahutia Memorandum of Understanding. James, will you take us through that, please?
I will. So attached to the paper is a draft accord document which sets out the proposed framework for a relationship going forward between Ngati Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated and the Regional Council. This is in response to the fact that in the last 6 months it's been identified that in parallel with the Council's accelerated efforts in afforestation in the region, that tangata whenua across the region have a similar goal and desire. There are a range of entities active in this space, but most notably Ngati Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated themselves. And this is a non-binding document that, as I say, creates a framework, sets out a series of expectations and guides engagement between ourselves and Ngati Kahungunu on the development of projects and programs of work where there's mutual benefit. It notes that both parties may continue to do things in the afforestation space separately where it makes sense, but that there are a whole range of areas in which we could collaborate, including in skills training, workforce development, and identification of suitable land for afforestation. So it's intended to start an enduring partnership that will get more specific in the fullness of time as we develop a better understanding of the nature of the investment opportunity here and seek to negotiate with Ngati Kahungunu investment vehicles and mechanisms for deploying our resources in partnership with them. So it's the start. There is work already underway that Ngati Kahungunu have initiated. There is particularly around the skills, workforce development and nursery development. And then there's work that we also have underway looking at regional land use and the opportunity to invest in a range of different forest types for environmental benefits. So
Questions?
Yeah.
Alan?
A couple of questions. James, is there any reason why this shouldn't have gone to a committee to facilitate double debate?
Look, the only reason why is that there had previously been, and I'm sorry it wasn't cited in the paper, but there was previously a resolution of council to explore this relationship, and in light of the fact that there was a desire to get on with this, we felt that it had been discussed previously, and rather than wait for the Environment Services Committee meeting, we just proposed to get on with it. But
second question, this council no longer has anyone on staff with particular forestry experience or
not correct.
Yeah.
So we do. So before James Powery left, we recruited Ben Douglas, who's currently looking after our forestry assets.
So has he got the same skills as Powery had?
Look, he's younger than James and earlier in his career, but he is, to the best of my knowledge, a qualified forester. Yep.
And Ngati Kahungunu, do they have skills or expertise in this area?
They've already assembled a team of skilled professionals in this area who they are currently paying for to do work for them. And so the short answer is yes, although they're not permanent staff, they're contractors to Ngati Kahungunu.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to propose that there be an addition, a couple of additions to the MOU. The reasons for will be obvious, but I'm not going to dwell on them. And I think it should say somewhere in its preamble that the agreement should be based on a fundamental, enduring relationship of mutual trust and respect between HBRC and Ngati. And also in there somewhere there should be a dispute resolution clause.
I think they're excellent additions. That was your suggestion of the good faith.
I mean, if it happens, it's a very long-term relationship. People change, situations change, and I think there just needs to be that underpinning of an expectation of mutual trust and respect on an ongoing basis.
Is everyone happy with those additions?
The only word I just don't like the word enduring. It implies something else which not. But I just think a relationship of mutual trust and respect is, I think, all that needs to be said.
Enduring.
Mutual trust and respect. That's tapping over the fancy arm. And I, for the life of me, don't know what you'd write as a dispute resolution process. But if you have a mutual trust and respect, I'd have thought that people would have resolved their issues within that framework.
Well, Mr. Chairman, most agreements that are intended to be long-term and enduring will have a form of dispute resolution process written into them.
Is there one on your marriage certificate?
Was there one on yours?
Won't be one
Probably should be.
Won't be.
Yeah, I think it's significant it is a non-binding agreement at this point in time, and perhaps if we get into a serious agreement, I think you definitely have disputes resolution.
Mr. Chair, just to add to Councillor Dick's approach, we're involved in a number of non-binding, non-commercial partnership agreements, and they do have reference to dispute or a resolution process should there be a disagreement. I don't think it's out of order to incorporate such.
Can you build that in, James? All right. Okay.
Mr. Chair, sorry.
James, I have a bit of a problem with this because we've been assured all the way through the long-term plan process that we would go out and consult. So for me, without having consulted, it's the cart before the horse, and I'm wondering if you can just talk me around that.
So this is really just a relationship document to oversee the work program that leads through to the public consultation. We've got a significant body of work to undertake to understand the nature of the opportunity here and everything that's involved, including the risk profile associated with investment in this area, and the idea here was really just to set up the framework for that relationship and that work ahead of the consultation, which is absolutely committed to and intended to be conducted later this year or early next year, just depending on when all the analytical work is complete.
What happens if during the public consultation the loud message comes back, no, get on with your knitting or whatever, but then where does that leave us?
Well, this is a non-binding memorandum of understanding, and it's deliberately so. So therefore, it can be terminated by either party at any time. So it doesn't create any enduring obligation to the council.
And we've expressed an ongoing desire in the last 5 years, I guess it is, that I've been around the council table to meet with Nicky's, and there's been a lack of willingness on their behalf to actually uptake that invitation. So I'm wondering why we're not, I don't know, we sit down with these guys.
Well, today would present a good opportunity, I think, possibly for you to resolve to invite Ngati Kahungunu to come in and discuss the intended work programme here. Probably the Environment Services Committee meeting on the early September, when we're proposing to report back on the progress on the work programme.
They have done presentation on the Kahutia project, and I've had two up with them. But all councillors have been invited to. I think some came and some didn't. Anyway, Neil?
Mr Chair, and further to Councillor Dick's suggested additions to the agreement, I wonder whether we could also consider, as part of the preamble, consideration of the Local Government Act and our obligations to consult with the recognised Māori authority, and given Kahungunu has a mandated authority, we acknowledge that as part of the preamble, and reference in particular the Local Government Act around the relationship with Māori culture and traditions, opportunities to contribute, process to contribute, develop Māori capacity to contribute. So all key features of our actual local government obligations. So we're making it quite clear in all of our engagements with respective Māori entities that the engagement is in fact part of both our obligation and our desire to meet those obligations.
No problem with that, Mr Chair.
I do have a problem with that.
I do too.
Because I don't want to partner with someone because someone tells me I have to. I want to do this, if we decide to do this, because we want to do this, not that someone is telling us we have to do this.
Well, it wasn't so much that, it was more recognising this iwi authority, and we are saying we acknowledge them as such.
I don't think it would hurt to note within here that it is consistent with our obligations under the legislation, as opposed to saying that it's the reason that we're doing it.
Yeah, no, I'm not keen on it for the reasons that Rex has. It makes it seem like we're doing it because we're told by statute to do it. The second thing is that if we recognise Māori authority, we'll leave people who read this with the implication that we are recognising Ngati Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated as the Māori recognised.
Don't want that to happen either.
Which would be a terrible thing to say. I just think it creates more problems than it solves, and I'm also asking myself, what is the value in doing this? What good is going to come out of it? And all I've heard is it's in the Act, and it seems no, I can't understand what value this adds to it all. If there was a value added to it, maybe, but I have no sense that there's any extra value to the MOU, a non-binding MOU, adding any worth to it.
Well, Mr Chair, in comment, I know we're not in debate, but it does give us an opportunity to demonstrate that we are engaging and we take opportunities to engage. And sets the framework for that, for any downstream and subsequent engagements.
I don't agree with that. We are engaging. We are.
Yeah, I would also suggest too, Chair, that this is actually an agreement between two entities, right? The council and Ngati is almost a commercial entity on its own. We're not. This isn't an agreement with them as a treaty settlement group or anything like that. It's a straight out business to me. It's a straight out business partnership agreement MOU.
Oh, I disagree, Mr. Chair. There are plenty of other commercial entities out there we could engage with. We've chosen Kahungunu because of that very reason of who they are.
Well, I'm just concerned about this. I could go through this and start to add in all the clauses I think I'd like to add into here if I really wanted to. We'd be here for a month if that's what we want to do. Look, I have my view about this is representatives of our council and Ngati have sat down and worked out this MOU, come back to us with a recommendation. I think we should just pick this thing up unless we have very good reason to make some change to it. Alan raised a point about good faith and about trust. I didn't think it was entirely necessary, but it was, given that a lot of other circumstances, I felt it should go in. Anything else, I'd leave it there, because we would then have to go back and ask them what do they want to have added in. They're going to write anything central. It's either accepted or rejected, in my view.
Do we have any more questions? Or
Are you going to put a percentage into the X marks?
Yes, so some guidance on that today would be helpful. Again, non-binding, and it's an expectation. We don't have to have the clause in there. It was really, you'll note in 3.3, that returns lower than expressed will be considered where there is an acceptable environmental or social dividend. So it's really only a guide. It's not anything particularly binding. The question probably is really whether you're looking at 5% or 6%, thereabouts. We have set targets in the long-term plan for our other investment capital, which rises to 5% in year two. Yeah. So 5% would be commensurate with the expectations we're placing on other investments. But it's not a big deal, and Ngati Kahungunu themselves haven't expressed their preferred figure. So I should have noted at the outset that this is being considered concurrently by the board of Ngati Kahungunu this week, and they may well have some changes they want to make as well. So there is a little bit of a process to go through to finalise this, which is why in the recommendations we suggested delegating that to the chairman to agree to any minor alterations, and if there was anything significant, we'd bring it back to you for further discussion.
It is my intention to support this, but before I do, I want to note for the record that I am in discussion with Ngati directly in terms of jointly developing forestry on my property. I'll make that decision on the merits as I see it, and but people should be aware that that conversation is going on.
Paul, sorry, and then we'll come down.
Yeah, just on the second bullet point on point 2 or paragraph 2, identification of suitable land and willing landowners for forest establishment partnerships. I'd be more comfortable if we turned that around and said identification of willing landowners with suitable land, because that kind of implies we're going to go on land and then try to talk someone into doing it or strong arm into changing it instead of the other way around.
So certainly the intention was not strong arm anyone. I think what we're trying to express here is that there is priority for this activity, and for us that priority is highly erodible land. And so part of the work program that we have underway is to identify that highly erodible land in the first instance, and then approach landowners and see who is willing within that area to make their land available for afforestation. So, yeah.
Yep. 6 1.5 dozen the other, but I just, to me, it's a much more positive approach rather than one that it could be seen as heavy-handed. But that's just my way of looking at it, I suppose.
Rick?
I'm willing to move the recommendations.
No further questions. We do have a mover. Do we have a second? I'll second.
Rick, could you take out the, in 3, as presented with minor amendments? Take out the or.
Take out the what?
As presented with minor amendments. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
I'm going to do that.
Do you want to speak, Rick?
I just want to speak briefly. I think this is a really positive move. It shows that the council is reaching out to build relationships, that we can't do a lot of these things by ourselves, and everybody's going to come to this and bring things which are essential to making this a success. Now, I have no doubt that we will enter into similar arrangements, maybe different in the structure, with other entities and other people on this a proposal to reforest the Hawke's Bay region. Very necessary to do because of the erosion, very necessary to do because of what's affecting our rivers, very necessary to do because of what is happening in the space of the sea outside of on the edges of our region. I think this is a really good thing to do. That's a non-binding, it's just a statement of intent, and I think it's a really good start. And I want to congratulate the people who have worked hard to bring this about. It's one small tentative step on what's going to be quite a long path, and it's a very important one, and I support it 100%.
Thank you, Rick. I also, as everyone's aware, I guess, support this. The task before us in reforestation, which is part of the what we see as solving the huge problems we've got before us, we can't do it alone. We do need partners, and this is just one of the partners going forward. Possibly it could be the most important partner going forward. Time will tell, but it's certainly a major step, not just in an environmental step, but in a solid commercial partnership with a Tangata Whenua group. And so I think that it's really important on two fronts, and so I'm strongly support this. Any other speakers? Tom?
Yes, I'd like to bring council's attention to point 8 on page 38, which talks about the program of work, and particularly the last sentence in that paragraph that talks about the advice we'll be getting tested with an advisory group of local forestry experts. I think, as everybody knows, when this whole concept was floated in the LTP process, there was a great deal of concern about what exactly would we be planting, and strong points of view expressed about not cloaking the region with pine trees and so forth. There are a lot of local folks with substantial decades of planting experience in Hawke's Bay, and many of those have raised their hand and said they would like to be consulted with as this unfolds. I've given a list of about 15 of these folks, pretty wide-ranging set of people, to the staff, and I'm assuming that this last reference to an advisory group of local forestry experts is reflecting that particular.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Neil?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Very happy to support the direction of travel, and particularly in regard to developing a furthering the relationship with the region's recognised iwi, Ngati Kahungunu. It's an obvious relationship, and one which is mandated for us to entertain through the Local Government Act, and I'm pleased to see in the document at 4.4 provision for such an activity to take place. Kahungunu is an obvious candidate for it because they are the iwi authority across the region. That is clear and obvious. So in addition to those commercial considerations, there is the consideration of our obligation as a local government entity responding to the needs of and desires of the Maori population. So Pleased to see this as one further step in that regard and look forward to others that may follow. It is a representation of the good faith in with which this council operates with tangata whenua in the region.
Well said, Neil. Thank you very
well
much.
spoken.
I agree with that.
Any other speakers? Otherwise, Rick, do you wish to wind up? Well, we have a motion and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? It's carried unanimously. That'll be interesting to report. Okay, item 10, fixing the common seal. Do we have someone to move this?
Seconded.
Who moves it? Alan. Seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Staff projects.
Chair will take it as read and take any questions.
Any questions on the projects?
Yeah, question 30. What's this Gisborne District Council grade? What's that? That's out of our area. What's that got to do with us?
Sorry, which one?
30.
Under engineering.
It's the amount.
33. So this is a
30.
30. This is a project that we took on a consultancy basis. So the Gisborne District Council does not have in-house capability for flood management design, and we periodically do contract work for them. And so we have been assisting in designing the stock bank upgrade for the gosh, the name of the river escapes me now. The Waipara, I think it is. Waipara?
It doesn't matter. It's an external contract.
It is.
Are there any other? Tom?
Just seeing environmental hotspots on here reminds me that at the Environment Committee meeting, we were shown a video that the staff has produced that goes through the various hotspots and what has been accomplished on each of those. It's a very well done, compelling picture of what we've done with the boost in funding that we asked for previously. And I'm not sure whether its existence has been otherwise shared with councillors, but if it hasn't been, I sent it to Rex, I think.
Yeah, and I didn't know about it until I got it and I watched it. It's outstanding. So I don't know.
Yeah.
We need to get that out there.
Facebook, I think it was on.
Really good.
Number 34, West Shore Beach renourishment. Main, last sentence, main 18-19 renourishment program scheduled for October 2018. What's the 18-19 renourishment? Is that a typo?
19, it should be the year.
2018, sorry, 2018, 2019.
George the Third was on.
George the Third, was it?
I think it was George the Third.
Okay, do we have a
The map
mover?
came
If we don't have
anyway.
nothing else that's
Yep.
pending, do we have a mover? Peter?
Second.
Paul, second. All those in favour of accepting the significant reports?
Aye.
Second projects? Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Now we have discussions not on the agenda. Items not on the agenda. Now, we're not having discussions on it. That was wrongly put. We're just going to have you have your say, and if you want some feedback, get feedback. But let's not have feedback here because we've got a big discussion topic to discuss afterwards. So, who do we start off with here?
Walnut trees.
issues.
Oh, walnut tree.
So, look, I'll give a very brief explanation of the events on this. As part of the riparian planting enhancement program, which Bostock, New Zealand has undertaken on Council Berm land, there was a meeting on site involving staff of Bostock, New Zealand and our staff as well. They walked around the area over a considerable length of time and discussed the planting plan and all the works to be undertaken. Subsequent to that, the walnut trees were pruned, and it's the view of Bostock, New Zealand staff that during that walk around the place, the question of pruning the walnut trees had been canvassed, and that our staff had given permission. Our staff were under the impression that they did not give permission. We've got 2 sets of events which we can't reconcile, but look, for all intents and purposes, the trees have been pruned. They are as they are. They can still survive and come back, and so there are ongoing discussions now with Bostock, New Zealand, about where to from here, and essentially putting some formality around the way forward on that piece of land.
Thank you for that, but it's not a good look.
It certainly wasn't. Second item.
LGNZ conference.
Oh, we have 2 reports on that. We have Debbie. You can go first.
No, Paul, go.
I'll go. Paul, go first. Ladies first, normally. You're the sweeper.
Yeah.
All right, Paul.
Had 3 wonderful days in the Canterbury High Country. Visited a couple of high country stations. Talking about dealing with water quality issues on the Rakaia River. I think that's how you say it. Rakaia. And also some challenges one of the stations have been having that have been purchased under the Overseas Investment Office, and the challenges they had to dealing with the requirements of that. We also had a look at one of the irrigations, one of the irrigation channels that they've got down there as well, which was just a big bunch of water going downstream. As Debbie mentioned earlier on, we visited an aquifer recharge scheme, which I found really fascinating. But the fact that they have to deal with an excess in nitrogen in the aquifer by diluting it seems like a bizarre way of dealing with things, instead of just stopping the aquifer becoming over nitrated in the first place. The regional sector tours, these are the ones that happened before the actual LGNZ conference. I find it really useful to have conversations with other regional councils around the country and the challenges that they're facing, which are pretty similar to what we are in a lot of respects, especially around water management. Gives you a different insight into the way things are looked at. And then the conference itself in Christchurch was a very pleasant experience. But unfortunately, most of it relates to territorial authority sort of issues, rather than stuff that's relating to regional council issues. Although there was a very excellent regional sector meeting where there was some stuff that was discussed, which I'm not entirely sure whether we should be talking about in public forum.
Okay, that's your report.
Yeah.
Debbie? Is your report different than that?
Yeah, I concur with what Paul's discussed. The regional sector tour is of tremendous value in terms of the time you spend with your fellow colleagues from throughout the country and just picking up on the learnings. So as you'll know, I've been interested in the opportunity for government to be contributing towards paying for the stop bank protection that's providing to their national roading network and bridges, and that's something that I've progressed at each of these tours, so that's ongoing. But for me, the highlights of the tour, one of them was visiting Claredale Farm, which is just at the base of Mount Hutt, and it was owned by the Todd Hunters. And they had a really interesting marriage of the father-in-law running this station, and the son married an extremely aggressive environmentalist. So the merging of the two views was far more topical than even around this table. As she said, well, they end up throwing the keys out of the ignition out the farm. I mean, we really saw the crossing of the roads and how one generation's transitioning to the next. They have a hydro scheme there too, which was interesting. We went up, and probably this was one of my highlights, Glenthorne Station. So we were so far into the high country that we were 50 k's to Hawke on the west coast. And so we were at the foot of the Wilberforce River, which is where Mona Anderson's book, A River Rules My Life, was based. So that was pretty pretty historical for me. The OIO rules that Paul discussed were hugely interesting because obviously there's a huge balance sheet ability there, and even though the station doesn't go up into the tops of some of the mountains, the owners instructed on a top-down approach to whether it's gorse or whatever works. So they're doing it on a regional scale there in a sensitive lake zone, and their leaching limit they're allowed there is 4. So and they're operating at 3.5. So it showed the benefits of foreign investment in a local community, and was pretty cool. The managed aquifer recharge, I've got the handout here. If anybody would like, I can get Leanne to run some copies of. The other thing that was really interesting, we visited the Ashley Dean Research and Development Station at Lincoln University, and I think that was a highlight for a lot of the. We just had a great trip, actually.
Plantain.
Yeah. So they're doing work on the likes of plantain, which is so as the cows urinate, they're not excreting the same amounts of nitrogen. They're replacing the lysimeters with Skylar technology, and it's all vacuumed into real time. It was pretty cool. So I'd just like to read the goal of this this research station. And I thought, I said to Paul, what do you think of this? Because I've been challenged with the future farming money because of so much other work that's been done around the country. So the goal of this station is to conduct farm systems research to improve the profitability, environmental and welfare performance of dairy livestock farming. And so there are a lot of models around the country that we need to be tapping into as opposed to replicating. The conference, I agree there too. It's more in the networking. It is very largely TA targeted. One of the interesting things was a climate change discussion with James Shaw, and he, Peter, you'll relate to this. He said climate change is everyone's problem, and it was quite interesting. I was fortunate to get out on a really in-depth tour with one of my colleagues from down there on the Sunday, and so we went out to Sumner, and he was giving me the local intel. So there's, for instance, a primary school there that is going to be relocated, and in spite of all the evidence from climate change, that this area where it's going to be relocated is at risk, and the Green Party are working on that. The Labour MP down there has pushed it through and said, no, we're going to put it here in an area where there's obviously going to be inundation. So they say it's interesting. These different politicians, they say different things, but seeing the rebuild down there in real life was pretty fascinating. Driving through the red zone and realising the amount of work that they've done. And this was outside of the tour, the conference, but just you're taking in things all the time. And you're looking at 600 hectares of land and realising that these are still people's gardens in here. And you see the trees and the odd ornament and stuff, and it's all just cleared. So the trauma of people driving back through there and seeing their back lawns, I just imagine is ongoing. The Christchurch is doing a lot of really cool stuff with, so the likes of these. We walked past a little putting green or something, and they'd taken steeples that had come off buildings, copper steeples, and just sort of plopped them around. So it's a really arty city, and they're recycling and reusing. I loved all the art down there too. I was really sorry that Hawke's Bay and really valuable few days, and
Because there was nothing in the information that we got that said that.
We're not going to debate it now. I mean, we all had to say. Okay, have you that it?
yeah, so any more questions if anybody's interested? I've got the itinerary here, but there's a lot of learnings that come back for our communities, and as I said, that managed aquifer recharge, that's going to be a beauty for us going forward, I'm sure.
Thank you, Debbie. Next one.
Napier City Council response to HBRC LTP submission.
That's me. We were all sent the response by Bill Dalton, and the last item is biodiversity. It says NCC is working with Cape Sanctuary in the development of a biodiversity strategy. NCC is committed to the development of this strategy and look at future funding once this work has been completed. I had been told that they committed $50,000 to the trust, biodiversity trust. And whether they have or haven't, I'd like to just inquire, is NCC now independently developing a biodiversity strategy with Cape Sanctuary? And what does that mean? And who represents Cape Sanctuary in such a biodiversity strategy development process? In other words, can we look into what
Come back to you on that.
what this is?
Thank you, Tom. Next one.
Was Fenton, and he's not here.
And he's disappeared. He was last one. Okay, now we have a big issue to discuss, and we know that Rick is going to leave.
Are we closing the meeting?
Close the meeting.
So I'm just saying, so we'll close the meeting now. Thank you very much for everyone attending. We officially close the meeting. You can turn the switch off.